Captain Jake Morrison had faced countless fires in his 15-year career, but he had never felt fear like this. Somewhere in the blazing inferno behind him, Blaze, his faithful fire dog partner of 4 years, was trapped and possibly dying. The building was beyond saving, and protocol demanded they let it burn. But when the search team finally found Blaze, what they discovered would prove that some bonds are stronger than fire itself. Captain Jake Morrison stood 6 feet tall, with weathered hands and eyes that had seen too much smoke and flame. At 42 years old, he was a veteran of the Metropolitan Fire Department, known for his calm under pressure and his unwavering dedication to saving lives. But for the past 4 years, he hadn't worked alone. By his side was Blaze, a golden retriever whose intelligence and courage had made him legendary. Among firefighters throughout the city, Blaze wasn't an ordinary fire dog. While most fire department dogs served as mascots or provided emotional support, Blaze was a working member of the team. He had been specially trained in search and rescue operations, with an extraordinary ability to locate people trapped in burning buildings. His nose could detect human scent through smoke and debris that would overwhelm even the most sophisticated equipment. The partnership between Jake and Blaze had begun 4 years earlier when the fire department decided to expand their search and rescue capabilities. Jake had volunteered to be trained as a canine handler, though he had initially been skeptical about working with an animal in such dangerous situations. Dogs have no place in a fire, he had told Chief Patricia Valdez when she first proposed the program. It's too dangerous and I won't be responsible for getting an animal killed. Chief Valdez had smiled knowingly. Just meet him first, then tell me what you think. The moment Jake met Blaze at the training facility, something had clicked. The 80 eyes that seemed to assess and approve of what they saw. During their first training exercise, Blaze had located a victim hidden in a smoke-filled training building faster than any human team had ever managed. How did he do that? Jake had asked the trainer, genuinely amazed. Natural talent combined with specialized training, she had explained. But the real magic happens when he bonds with his handler. These dogs don't just follow commands, they become extensions of their human partners. Over the following months, Jake and Blaze had trained together daily. They learned to communicate with subtle signals, to move as one unit through dangerous terrain, and to trust each other with their lives. Jake discovered that Blaze seemed to anticipate his thoughts and movements, while the dog learned to read Jake's body language and vocal cues with remarkable precision. Their first real fire call together had been a house fire on Maple Street. A family of 4 was trapped on the 2nd floor, and traditional search methods were proving too slow in the rapidly spreading blaze. Jake and Blaze had entered through a rear window, and within minutes, Blaze had located all 4 family members in a back bedroom where they had taken refuge. I've never seen anything like it, Fire Captain Rodriguez had said afterward. That dog didn't just find them, he led us straight to them, like he had a map of the building in his head. Word of their success spread quickly through the department. Soon, Jake and Blaze were being called to the most challenging rescues. The situations where traditional methods had failed. In 4 years, they had saved 37 lives together, a record that had earned them commendations from the mayor and recognition from fire departments across the state. But their partnership was about more than just professional success. Jake had grown to love Blaze with the fierce protectiveness of a parent. The dog lived with Jake and his wife Sarah, serving as both working partner and beloved family member. Blaze seemed to understand the difference between home and work, transforming from a playful pet into a focused professional the moment they arrived at the firehouse. He's not just your partner, Sarah often told her husband. He's your shadow. You two move like you share the same brain. It was true. After 4 years together, Jake and Blaze had developed an almost supernatural connection. Jake could tell when Blaze was picking up a scent before the dog even alerted. Blaze seemed to know when Jake was feeling stressed or uncertain, offering comfort with a gentle nudge or a reassuring presence. The call came in at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon in late October. Jake was in the firehouse kitchen, sharing lunch with Blaze, who sat patiently beside his chair, waiting for the occasional piece of sandwich that Jake would accidentally drop. Structure fire, 1247 Oak Street. Multiple residents trapped. Possible children involved, the dispatcher announced over the intercom. All units respond immediately. Jake was on his feet before the announcement finished, with Blaze already moving toward the truck bay. The address sent a chill through Jake's spine. 1247 Oak Street was the Riverside apartment complex, a 4-story building that housed dozens of families, many with young children. The ride to the scene took 8 minutes, but Jake could see the smoke rising from blocks away. By the time they arrived, the situation was clearly dire. Flames were visible on multiple floors, and residents were hanging from windows, desperately calling for help. Command to all units. Chief Valdez's voice crackled over the radio. We have confirmed trapped residents on floors 2, 3, and 4. This is a rescue priority situation. Engine 12, establish water supply. Ladder 7, begin evacuations from the east side. Morrison and Blaze, you're going in through the main entrance to search for any remaining residents. Jake looked up at the building, assessing the situation. The fire had started on the first floor and was spreading rapidly upward. Smoke was pouring from every window, and the structure was clearly compromised. This was exactly the kind of situation where Blaze's abilities could make the difference between life and death. "Ready, boy?" Jake asked, adjusting his breathing apparatus and checking his equipment. Blaze looked up at him with those amber eyes, his body tense with anticipation. The dog's tail wagged once, his signal that he was ready to work. They entered the building through the main lobby, which was already filled with thick, acrid smoke. The emergency lighting had failed, leaving them dependent on Jake's flashlight and their training to navigate the corridors. Jake could feel the heat intensifying as they moved deeper into the building. "Blaze search," Jake commanded, and the golden retriever immediately began working, his nose testing the air as they moved through the first floor. They had cleared 3 apartments when Blaze suddenly stopped and tilted his head, listening intently. Jake froze, knowing that his partner had detected something. The dog's ears were forward, his body rigid with concentration. "What is it, boy?" Jake whispered. Blaze moved toward the stairwell, but instead of heading up as Jake expected, the dog turned toward a corridor they hadn't yet explored. Jake followed, trusting his partner's instincts completely. The corridor led to a section of the building that housed several single-occupancy apartments, often rented by elderly residents or students. As they moved deeper into the hallway, Jake could hear something that made his blood run cold, the faint sound of crying. "Blaze, find," Jake commanded, and the dog immediately led him to apartment 1C. The door was locked, but Jake could hear movement inside. "Fire department, is anyone in there?" A weak voice responded. "Help us, we can't get out." Jake forced the door open to find an elderly woman and a young child huddled in the corner of the living room. The woman was barely conscious, overcome by smoke inhalation, while the child, a girl who couldn't have been more than 5 years old, was crying and trying to wake her grandmother. "It's okay, sweetheart," Jake said, quickly assessing the situation. "We're going to get you both out of here. Getting to people out of the building would require multiple trips or additional help." Jake made a quick decision and radioed for backup, but the response he received was not what he wanted to hear. "Morrison, we've got a partial collapse on the second floor. All available units are committed to evacuations on the upper floors. You're going to have to handle this on your own." Jake looked at the elderly woman, who was unconscious, and the terrified child. He could carry the woman, but that would mean leaving the child behind momentarily, something that went against every instinct he had. As he tried to figure out the best approach, Blaze made the decision for him. The dog moved to the child and gently took her jacket sleeve in his mouth, tugging her toward the door. The girl, who had been too frightened to move, seemed to understand that Blaze was trying to help her. "Follow the dog, sweetheart," Jake told her as he lifted the unconscious woman. "He's going to lead you out of here." What happened next would be burned into Jake's memory forever. As they made their way through the smoke-filled corridor, with Jake carrying the woman and Blaze guiding the child, the building shuddered around them. The fire was spreading faster than anyone had anticipated, and Jake realized they might not make it to the exit before the structure became completely unstable. As they reached the main lobby, Jake could see that their exit route was now blocked by debris from a partial ceiling collapse. The building was groaning and creaking around them, and he knew they had minutes at most before the entire structure became a death trap. "Command. This is Morrison," he radioed desperately. "Our primary exit is blocked. I have 2 civilians and need immediate assistance with alternate egress." The response that came back filled him with dread. "Morrison, the building is showing signs of imminent collapse. All personnel need to evacuate immediately. That's an order." Jake looked down at the unconscious woman in his arms, then at the terrified child who was clinging to Blaze's collar. He could leave them and save himself and his partner, but that was not an option he could live with. "Negative, Command. I have civilians who cannot self-evacuate. We're going to find another way out." "Morrison, that's not a request. The building is coming down. Get out now." But Jake was already moving, following Blaze as the dog led them toward a window that might serve as an alternate exit. The golden retriever seemed to understand the urgency of the situation, moving quickly but carefully to ensure the child could keep up. They had almost reached the window when the unthinkable happened. A massive section of the ceiling came crashing down, separating Jake and the civilians from Blaze. The dog was on the far side of a pile of burning debris, barking frantically as he tried to find a way to reach them. "Blaze," Jake shouted, but his voice was lost in the roar of flames and falling debris. The child started crying harder, calling for the dog who had become her lifeline in the chaos. Jake made a split-second decision that would haunt him for hours to come. "Blaze, stay," he commanded, hoping his partner would understand that he needed to find his own way out while Jake focused on saving the civilians. By dawn. The fire was finally under control, though smoke still rose from the smoldering ruins of what had once been home to 60 families. The building was a complete loss, reduced to a skeleton of twisted metal and charred concrete. Jake hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, hadn't left the scene. He stood at the perimeter, waiting for the structure to cool enough for search teams to enter. Chief Valdez had tried multiple times to send him home, but he refused to leave without Blaze. "Jake, you need to rest," she said for the 10th time. "The search team will handle this. If Blaze is ... She paused, unable to finish the sentence. "If he's in there, we'll find him." "I'm going in," Jake said flatly. "He's my partner. I'm not leaving him for someone else to find." The search team consisted of Jake, 3 other firefighters, and 2 members of the Urban Search and Rescue Unit. They entered the building through what had once been the main lobby, now a cave of debris and ash. The devastation was complete. Nothing recognizable remained of the building's interior. They moved carefully through the ruins, calling Blaze's name and listening for any sign of life. For 2 hours, they searched methodically through each accessible area of the first floor. They found no trace of Blaze, no sign that he had ever been there. Jake's hope, already barely alive, began to flicker out completely. Morrison, one of the search team members, called from across the rubble field. "We found something." Jake's heart stopped as he made his way carefully across the unstable debris. Had they found Blaze's body? He wasn't sure he was prepared for that confirmation of his worst fears. But what they had found wasn't Blaze. It was a section of the building where the ceiling had collapsed in such a way that it created a small protected space beneath a heavy concrete beam. The area was filled with ash and debris, but it was clear that something had been sheltering there. "Look at this," the search team leader said, pointing to marks in the ash. "These look like paw prints. Something was definitely here." Jake knelt down and examined the marks. They were the right size and shaped to be Blaze's prints, but they were scattered and unclear. More importantly, they led away from the protected space, deeper into the building. "He was here," Jake said, his voice filled with new hope. "He found shelter, and then he moved on. But why would he leave a safe place?" One of the firefighters asked. Jake stood up, his mind racing. He knew Blaze better than anyone, and suddenly he understood what his partner had been doing all this time. He wasn't hiding, Jake said with certainty. He was working. He was still trying to complete the mission, but Blaze didn't stay. Instead, the dog disappeared deeper into the building, apparently searching for another route to reach his handler and the people he was trying to protect. "No," Jake screamed, but it was too late. His partner was gone, swallowed by smoke and flamed out. With his heart breaking, Jake found a way to get the woman and child to safety through a damaged window, where other firefighters were waiting to help. But as he stumbled out of the building himself, the only thing on his mind was the loyal partner he had left behind. The Riverside apartment complex burned for 6 hours. Despite the efforts of multiple fire companies, the blaze was too intense, and the building too compromised to mount an effective interior attack. All they could do was contain the fire and prevent it from spreading to adjacent buildings. Jake stood behind the command post, still in his gear, watching his world burn. Chief Valdez had ordered him to report to the paramedics for evaluation, but he refused to leave. Somewhere in that inferno was Blaze, and Jake would not abandon him. "Jake." Chief Valdez approached him with sympathy in her eyes. "You did everything you could. You saved those people." "I left him," Jake said, his voice hollow. "I left my partner in there. You followed protocol. You got the civilians out, which was your primary mission. Blaze is a smart dog. He'll find somewhere safe to wait it out." But Jake knew better. Blaze wouldn't hide and wait. The dog's training and instincts would drive him to keep searching, to keep trying to help, even if it meant putting himself in mortal danger. As the hours passed, Jake's hope began to fade. The building's structure was failing, with entire sections collapsing into the flames. The temperature inside was approaching levels that no living thing could survive. Captain Morrison, one of the younger firefighters, approached hesitantly. "Is there anything we can do? Maybe when the fire dies down, we could... Jake shook his head. "The building's going to be a total loss. By the time it's cool enough to search, it'll be too late." The words tasted like ash in his mouth. For years of partnership, he had never imagined losing Blaze this way. They had faced dangerous situations before, but they had always faced them together. Sarah arrived at the scene around the 5-hour mark. Having heard about the fire on the news, she found Jake sitting on the bumper of a fire truck, staring at the burning building with empty eyes. "Any word?" she asked, though she already knew the answer from his expression. "He's been in there for 5 hours, Jake said quietly. "Nothing could survive that long in those conditions." Sarah sat beside her husband, taking his soot-covered hand in hers. "Blaze is strong, and he's smart. Maybe he found an air pocket or a place where the fire hasn't reached." Jake wanted to believe her, but his experience told him otherwise. The building was an inferno, with temperatures that would be lethal within minutes. Even if Blaze had found temporary shelter, the smoke inhalation alone would have overcome him by now. As the 6th hour approached, Chief Valdez made the decision that Jake had been dreading. All units begin transitioning to defensive operations only. No further interior attacks will be made on this structure. It was the official acknowledgement that anyone still inside the building was beyond help. Jake felt something die inside him as he heard the words. The realization that Blaze had survived the initial hours of the fire filled Jake with renewed energy. If his partner had been mobile enough to leave tracks, there was still hope of finding him alive. The search team followed the trail of paw prints deeper into the building. Through corridors that had been transformed into alien landscapes of twisted metal and melted plastic, the tracks were faint and often interrupted by debris, but Jake's trained eye could pick them out. The dog was moving with purpose, observed Lieutenant Sarah Kim from the search and rescue team. These aren't the random movements of a panicked animal. He was going somewhere specific. Jake nodded, his heart pounding with anticipation and fear. Blaze's tracks were leading them toward the rear of the building, to a section that had housed several ground floor apartments. As they navigated through what had once been a hallway, they came across something that made Jake's breath catch in his throat. Lying in the ash was Blaze's collar, the specially designed piece of equipment that identified him as a working fire dog. His collar came off, Jake said, picking up the soot-covered leather strap. But that doesn't mean ... He couldn't finish the sentence. Actually, Lieutenant Kim said, examining the collar carefully, this looks like it was deliberately removed. See how the buckle is undamaged. If he had been caught in debris or overcome by smoke, the collar would show signs of damage or stretching. The implications of her observation hit Jake like a physical blow. If Blaze had deliberately removed his collar, it meant he was not only alive but thinking clearly enough to propel himself. He took it off because it was getting caught on something. Jake realized he needed to move through a space too narrow for the collar. They pressed on, following the increasingly faint trail deeper into the ruins. The search was becoming more dangerous as they moved further from the stable areas near the building's perimeter, but Jake refused to give up. Finally, after what felt like hours but had probably been only 20 minutes, they heard it, a faint sound that made everyone freeze. "Did you hear that?" whispered one of the search team members. They all stood perfectly still, straining to hear over the settling sounds of the damaged building. Then it came again, a weak, barely audible whimper. "Blaze," Jake called out, his voice echoing through the ruins. The response was immediate but heartbreakingly weak, a single bark that seemed to come from somewhere ahead of them, in an area where the ceiling had collapsed almost completely. Following the sound of Blaze's bark, the search team carefully made their way through the most damaged section of the building. The ceiling had collapsed in multiple places, creating a maze of concrete slabs and twisted steel beams. "Be careful," Lieutenant Kim warned. "This whole section is unstable. One wrong move could bring down what's left of the upper floor." Jake barely heard her. All of his attention was focused on finding his partner, whose weak barks were growing slightly stronger as they got closer. Finally, they reached a section where a massive concrete beam had fallen diagonally, creating a triangular space beneath it. The opening was barely large enough for a person to crawl through, and it was completely black inside. "Blaze," Jake called softly into the darkness. The response was immediate, a series of weak but excited barks that confirmed what Jake had hoped but barely dared to believe. Blaze was alive. Jake immediately began crawling through the narrow opening, his flashlight illuminating the space ahead. What he saw when the beam of light found Blaze made him gasp in amazement. The golden retriever was lying in the corner of the small protected space, clearly exhausted and covered in soot, but very much alive. But he wasn't alone. Curled up against his side was a small child, a boy who couldn't have been more than 3 years old. "Oh my God," Jake breathed. "Blaze, what did you do?" As Jake carefully made his way closer, the full scope of what had happened became clear. Blaze had somehow found this child, probably during the chaos of the initial evacuation, and had led him to this protected space. For 6 hours, the dog had maintained a protective vigil over the boy, using his own body to shield the child from smoke and debris. "Command, this is Morrison," Jake radioed with a shaking voice. "I've found Blaze, and he has a civilian with him. Child, approximately 3 years old, alive and conscious." The radio exploded with excited chatter as word of the discovery spread through the incident command structure. But Jake's attention was entirely focused on his partner and the child. Blaze tried to lift his head when he saw Jake, his tail managing a weak wag. The dog's eyes were bright but tired, and Jake could see that he was dehydrated and exhausted from his ordeal. "Good boy," Jake whispered, reaching out to touch Blaze's head. "Such a good boy. You saved him, didn't you?" The child, who appeared to be in remarkably good condition considering his ordeal, looked up at Jake with wide, frightened eyes. But when Jake reached for him, the boy clung tighter to Blaze, clearly understanding that the dog had been his protector throughout the nightmare. "It's okay, buddy," Jake said gently. "I'm here to help. Blaze is my partner, and he's going to be fine. We're going to get both of you out of here." Getting both Blaze and the child out of the cramped space required careful coordination. The opening was too narrow for Jake to carry either of them, and the structural instability of the area made the rescue even more challenging. "We need to widen this opening," Lieutenant Kim called from outside. "But we have to be careful not to destabilize the beam that's protecting them." While the technical rescue team worked to create a safer extraction route, Jake stayed with Blaze and the child, trying to keep both of them calm and hydrated. He had brought a small water bottle with him, and he carefully helped both the dog and the boy drink small sips. "How long have you been here, buddy?" Jake asked the child gently, though he didn't expect an answer. To his surprise, the boy held up 3 fingers, then pointed to Blaze and said, "Doggy saved me." Jake felt tears welling up in his eyes as he realized the full magnitude of what his partner had accomplished somehow in the chaos and terror of the fire. Blaze had found this lost child and had kept him safe for 6 hours in conditions that should have been lethal. "That's right," Jake told the boy. "The doggy saved you. His name is Blaze, and he's a very special dog." As the rescue team worked to expand the opening, Jake examined Blaze more carefully. The dog was clearly exhausted and dehydrated, but he seemed to have avoided serious injury. His breathing was labored from smoke inhalation, but his eyes were alert and responsive. "You did it, partner," Jake whispered, stroking Blaze's suit-covered fur. "You completed the mission. You found someone who needed help, and you kept him safe." Finally, after an hour of careful work, the rescue team had created an opening large enough for safe extraction. Paramedics were standing by with stretchers and oxygen equipment for both the child and the dog. Jake carefully lifted the child, first passing him through the opening to waiting paramedics. The boy cried briefly when separated from Blaze, but quickly calmed down when he saw that the dog was also being rescued. Extracting Blaze required more care. The dog was weak from his ordeal and couldn't support his own weight reliably. Jake and Lieutenant Kim worked together to carefully move him through the opening and onto a makeshift stretcher that the team had rigged for animal rescue. As they emerged from the ruins into the daylight, Jake squinted against the bright morning sun. Around the perimeter of the building, dozens of firefighters, paramedics, and other emergency responders had gathered to witness the rescue. When they saw Jake emerge carrying Blaze, a spontaneous cheer erupted from the crowd. The sound seemed to energize the exhausted dog, who lifted his head and managed a weak but unmistakable wag of his tail. The veterinary team was waiting when they reached the ambulance area. Dr. Michael Torres, the emergency veterinarian, immediately began examining Blaze, while paramedics worked on the child in a nearby ambulance. "He's dehydrated and suffering from smoke inhalation," Dr. Torres explained to Jake as he worked, "but considering what he's been through, his condition is remarkably stable. This is one tough dog." "He's always been tough," Jake replied, never taking his eyes off his partner. "But I've never seen anything like what he did in there." As Dr. Torres continued his examination, more details about the child's identity began to emerge. His name was Tommy Rodriguez, and his frantic grandmother had reported him missing during the initial evacuation. In the chaos of the fire, no one had realized that the 3-year-old had become separated from his family and trapped in the building. "How did Blaze find him?" Chief Valdez asked Jake as they watched the medical team's work. "I don't know," Jake admitted, "but somehow, even after we got separated, he kept working. He found a child who needed help, and he did whatever it took to keep him safe." The story of Blaze's heroic rescue spread quickly through the emergency responder community and then to the media. By evening, news crews were set up outside the hospital where both Blaze and Tommy were being treated. Tommy's family arrived at the hospital in tears, having spent the day believing they had lost him in the fire. When they learned that a fire dog had kept their son safe for 6 hours in the burning building, they insisted on meeting Jake and Blaze. "I can never repay what your dog did for our family," Tommy's grandmother, Maria Rodriguez, told Jake through her tears. "He gave us back our little boy." Jake looked down at Blaze, who was resting on a special bed in the veterinary treatment area. The dog was receiving oxygen therapy and IV fluids, but his condition was steadily improving. "He was just doing his job," Jake said quietly. "But I've never been more proud of him than I am right now." Blaze's recovery took several weeks. The smoke inhalation had affected his lungs, and the stress of his ordeal had taken a toll on his overall condition. But with careful veterinary care and lots of attention from Jake and Sarah, he gradually returned to his normal self. The story of his heroic rescue had made national news, and the fire station was flooded with cards, flowers, and treats for the hero dog. Children from local schools sent drawings of firefighters and dogs, while adults wrote letters expressing their admiration for Blaze's courage and loyalty. "You're a famous boy," Jake told Blaze during one of his visits to the veterinary hospital, "but you're still the same loyal partner you've always been." Tommy Rodriguez made a full recovery and was released from the hospital within days of the rescue. His family visited Blaze regularly during his recovery, and a special bond developed between the child and the dog who had saved his life. Tommy would squeal with delight every time he saw the golden retriever, and Blaze would respond with gentle tail wags and patient acceptance of the boy's enthusiastic hugs. The department held a formal ceremony to recognize Blaze's heroism, presenting him with a special medal for valor. But for Jake, the real reward was simpler: having his partner back, healthy and ready to return to the work they both loved. 2 months after the Riverside apartment fire, Jake and Blaze returned to active duty. Their first call was a routine inspection at a local school, nothing dramatic or dangerous, but as they walked through the hallways, Jake noticed something different about his partner. Blaze seemed more alert, more attuned to the people around them. Children would stop to pet him, and adults would pause to shake Jake's hand and thank them for their service. The dog seemed to understand that he had become something special, not just a working fire dog, but a symbol of courage and loyalty. "He's changed," Sarah observed that evening as she watched Blaze playing in their backyard. "He's more confident, more aware of his importance." Jake nodded. "I think he finally understands what he's capable of. He's always been brave, but now he knows he can handle anything." Their partnership had been strong before the fire, but now it was unbreakable. Jake trusted Blaze completely, and the dog seemed to have developed an even deeper understanding of his role and responsibilities. The story of Blaze's heroism continued to inspire people long after the initial news coverage had faded. Fire departments around the country began expanding their canine programs, recognizing the potential for dogs to contribute to search and rescue operations. Jake was invited to speak at conferences and training sessions, sharing the story of his partnership with Blaze and the lessons they had learned together, but he always emphasized that Blaze's heroism wasn't the result of extraordinary training or unique circumstances. It was the natural expression of the bond between a loyal partner and his human teammate. "Dogs like Blaze teach us about loyalty, courage, and selflessness." Jake would tell audiences, "They remind us that true heroism isn't about seeking glory or recognition. It's about doing whatever it takes to help others, even when it puts your own life at risk." Tommy Rodriguez continued to visit Jake and Blaze regularly, and his family became like extended family to the firefighter and his wife. The boy grew up hearing the story of how Blaze had saved his life, and he never forgot the lesson about the power of loyalty and courage. 5 years later, Jake and Blaze continue to serve together, though Blaze is now approaching the age when most working dogs begin to consider retirement. Their partnership has saved dozens of lives and has become legendary within the fire service. But their greatest achievement isn't measured in lives saved or awards received, it's in the example they've set of what it means to be truly loyal partners. Their story has inspired countless other firefighter and dog teams, and has reminded everyone who hears it that some bonds are strong enough to overcome any obstacle. "People ask me what makes Blaze special," Jake reflects. "The answer is simple. He understands that being part of a team means never abandoning your partner, no matter how difficult or dangerous the situation becomes." The fire at the Riverside apartment complex was rebuilt as a memorial garden with a special plaque, recognizing the heroism of all the first responders who fought the blaze. But at the center of the garden stands a statue of a firefighter and his dog, forever commemorating the loyalty that saved a child's life and reminded the world that true friendship knows no limits. Blaze's story continues to inspire new generations of firefighters and their canine partners, proving that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the willingness to act despite that fear when someone you care about is in danger. In a world where commitment is often temporary and relationships are treated as disposable, their partnership stands as proof that some bonds are truly unbreakable. Their legacy lives on in every search and rescue operation, in every act of courage performed by firefighters and their dogs, and in every reminder that the greatest heroes are often those who serve others without expecting anything in return. Jake and Blaze's story is a testament to the transformative power of loyalty, the healing strength of partnership, and the unbreakable bonds that exist between true friends who would literally walk through fire for each other.